Last week, in our last lesson, we were looking at the first two parables in Luke chapter 15 concerning a lost sheep and a lost coin. And in this evening's lesson, we're going to look at the third parable in this series, which Jesus spoke in response to the criticism he had received from the Pharisees and the scribes concerning his association with those who were labeled as tax collectors and sinners. We see in the opening verses of chapter 15, verses 1 and 2, which provides the context for these three parables. Now the tax collectors and sinners were all drawing near to hear him, and the Pharisees and the scribes murmured, saying, "This man receives sinners and eats with them." So it's in response to that criticism that Jesus now tells these three parables. And as we looked at the first two last week, with the lost sheep recorded in verses 3 to 7, and then the lost coin in verses 8 to 10, we now come to the third of these parables, which is the parable of the lost son in chapter 15, verses 11 to 32. So we'll read through the passage here. This is Luke chapter 15, verse 11 to 32. And he said, a certain person had two sons, and the younger one said to the father, "Father, give to me the share of the property that falls to me." And so he distributed to them his livelihood. After a few days, the younger son gathered everything he had and journeyed to a distant country, and there he squandered his wealth, living wastefully. When he had spent everything, a mighty famine took place in that country, and he faced collapse. And travelling, he hired himself to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him to his field to tend pigs. And he longed to fill his stomach with the carob pods, but no one gave him anything. And he came to himself and said, "How many of my father's day labourers have more than enough bread? But I am perishing from hunger. I will get up, go to my father, and say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me like one of your day labourers." And getting up, he came to his own father. But when he was still a long way distant, his father saw him and was moved with compassion. He ran and fell on his neck and kissed him. The son said to him, "Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son." The father said to his slaves, "Quickly, bring out a long robe, the best one, and dress him, and then put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet, and bring the fattened calf, kill it, and we will feast and party. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found." And they began to party. The elder son was in the field, and as he came near to the house, he heard singing and dancing. And calling one of the young servants, he asked him what might be happening. He said to him, "Your brother has come, and your father has killed the fatted calf because he has got back in one piece." He became angry and did not want to go in, but his father came out and pleaded with him. But he answered his father, "Look, for so many years I have slaved for you, and I have never ignored your commands, and you've never given to me even a young goat so that I might party with my friends. But when this son of yours, who has consumed your livelihood with prostitutes, came, you killed the fatted calf for him." He said to him, "Child, you are always with me, and everything of mine is yours. But we had to party and rejoice, because this brother of yours was dead and lives, and was lost and is found." So the third parable recorded by Luke here in this series is one of the perhaps best known and best loved of all of the parables told by Jesus. The first parable concerned the loss of an animal, sheep, 1 out of 100. And the second concerned the loss of a coin, 1 out of 10. But the third concerns the loss of a person. This is often referred to as the parable of the prodigal son. Prodigal is a word that we don't really use very often these days, or never hear it used other than in connection with this parable, perhaps. But it's a word that means to be wasteful, reckless, and extravagant. The parable has been called various other things as well by different writers, it's been called simply the lost son or the two lost sons. Others have entitled it A Father's Love, or The Parable of the Loving Father, or On Celebrating a Longed For Return. And then one other title, The Prodigal Son, The Loving Father, and The Elder Brother, which sort of covers just about every character in the story there. This is a longer parable than the previous two, and it is in the form of a more complete story. Jesus is telling a realistic story of a man here who has two sons. And the elder son is introduced at the beginning of the story, but he doesn't appear again until the end. The younger son came and he asked his father to give him the share of the property that would be his when his father died. In Deuteronomy chapter 21 and verse 17, we have what the law states concerning the inheritance for sons and the inheritance, the proportion of the inheritance that would come to the firstborn. He would get double what the second son would get. So Deuteronomy chapter 21, verse 17 says, he shall acknowledge the firstborn, the son of the disliked, concerning the man's wives here, the disliked wife, by giving him a double portion of all that he has, for he is the first issue of his strength. The right of the firstborn is his. So the firstborn son would have double the inheritance of any other son. So in this case, the younger son would be expecting to get 1/3 of the property. The older son, the firstborn, he would get double. He would get 2/3 of that. So the younger son is expecting to get 1/3, and this is what he's asking from his father here. But there is an arrogance or an impertinence about this request. In effect, he's asking for this inheritance when his father is not yet dead. And this wasn't really the done thing. It would be regarded as something quite outrageous or a shameful thing to do. But the father, perhaps displaying some indulgence towards his younger son, grants the request, and he divided his property between the two sons. And we're given here the impression of a wealthy man, a wealthy estate. This man has hired servants. These are day laborers, people that he would employ on a daily basis. And he also has slaves who are working for him as well. So now that the younger son has been given this inheritance, he has control of his own wealth. And so very soon he gathered together his possessions and he left home for a distant country. So the money he has received from his father now enabled him to be independent. He could now go off and see the world and experience what the world has to offer. When he gets to that distant, far country, we're told that he squandered his wealth in loose or reckless living. This is where that word prodigal comes in. In verse 13 here, J.B. Phillips translates it as, he squandered his wealth in the wildest extravagance. But after he had spent everything, his money runs out, the country is then hit by a severe famine, and the son is now facing need. Although the famine was not his fault, the famine made his circumstances much more difficult. It added to the hardship that he had brought on himself by his wasteful living. Food would be in short supply, and it would be expensive. And people who he might have been able to turn to for help would not be able to help him. And so in order to provide for himself, he attaches himself to one of the people of that country, goes to work for them, and he is sent into the fields to feed the swine or the pigs. To the Jew, the pig was an unclean animal, and under normal circumstances, no Jew would even consider taking a job that involved working with pigs. Leviticus chapter 11 and verse 7 lists the pigs here as uh, in this list of unclean animals, Leviticus 11, verse 7, it says, and the swine or pigs, because it parts the hoof and is cloven-footed, but does not chew the cud, is unclean to you. So it's an unclean animal. And the Jewish Talmud, which is a sort of collection of traditions and comment on the law, says, "Cursed be the man who breeds swine." But this is really an indication of how desperate the young man has become. That he's had to resort to working with pigs. And he was so hungry that he would gladly have eaten the pods that were fed to the swine. But we're told that no one gave him anything. He's not even allowed to eat the food that is for the pigs. So the pigs were being better fed than he was. So this is the depth to which this young man has sunk. And it's at this point, at his lowest point, we're told that he came to himself, or the New English Bible translates that as he came to his senses. So he now begins to understand his true condition and begins to realize that all of this is of his own doing, that these are the consequences of his own bad choices. And if he is to get out of this condition, then he has to make some other decisions and some other choices. He got himself into this, and now he must get himself out. And so he began to think about home and to think of how well fed his father's hired servants would have been, that even those hired servants are better off than him, that they would have sufficient food and some to spare whilst he's there perishing with hunger. So at this point, the son then made the decision to go back home. His plan was to return to his father, to confess that he had sinned against heaven and before you, and acknowledging his unworthiness to be called his father's son, he would ask to be treated as one of the hired servants. In saying that he had sinned against heaven, he is really saying that he has sinned against God. We may, of course, sin against other people, and the son acknowledges that he says that he sinned against heaven and before you in reference to his father. But ultimately, all sin is against God and needs to be confessed to him. David in Psalm 51, verse 4, psalm written according to the title after David had committed adultery with Bathsheba, David says here, against, speaking to God, against thee only have I sinned and done that which is evil in thy sight, so that thou art justified in thy sentence and blameless in thy judgment. Of course, David's sin wasn't only against God, it was against Bathsheba and her husband Uriah as well. But he realizes that his sin ultimately is against God. And so he says this, against thee only have I sinned and done that which is evil in thy sight. So he's confessing that sin. And then in Psalm 32, verses 3 to 5 as well, again, a psalm which may be come from that same incident. David says here, when I declared not my sin, my body wasted away through my groaning all day long. For day and night thy hand was heavy upon me, my strength was dried up, as by the heat of summer. I acknowledged my sin to thee, and I did not hide my iniquity. I said, I will confess my transgressions to the Lord. Then thou didst forgive the guilt of my sin. So an awareness by David here of the need to confess that sin in order to receive forgiveness. John, in his first letter in 1 John chapter 1 and verse 9, also tells us there of the importance of confession of our sins to God. If we say we have no sin, we deceive ourselves and the truth is not in us. If we confess our sins, he, that's God, is faithful and just and will forgive our sins and cleanse us from all unrighteousness. So this is what the younger son realizes here, that of his need to go home and to acknowledge to his father his sin, to confess that sin, that he has sinned against heaven and before you. He plans to say to his father. So with the decision being made, then the son set off on his journey back home to his father. Verse 20 says, "And he arose and came to his father." He must have felt a sense of shame, going home in shame, having lost everything. He'd taken all of his wealth that he had with him, and now he's returning home with nothing. Perhaps feeling somewhat of a failure in all of this. And then in one of the loveliest pictures we have in the Bible, Jesus describes his father's reaction on his return. Verse 20 says, "But while he was yet at a distance, his father saw him and had compassion and ran and embraced him and kissed him." So from a distance, the father could see his son coming down the road. Perhaps that implies that he's been out looking for his son to return, waiting for his son to return, having that hope that one day he would see him coming down the road. And now the sight thrilled him, and with his heart filled with compassion, he ran to greet his son, embracing him and kissing him. It would have been an undignified sight to see this older man running down the road with his robes hitched up to enable him to run. But all thoughts of dignity and decorum were put to one side when he saw his son coming. And the son could not have known what sort of reception he would get when he came back. Would he be rejected? Would he be welcome? He'd brought dishonor on his family. And what would other people in the local community think about him and his return now? The warmth of this welcome, which was undeserved and unexpected, must have really surprised him, but encouraged him also and reassured him. It gave him the confidence to make that confession that he had rehearsed. So he says, "Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son." Perhaps his father did not give him the chance to finish and to ask to be treated like one of the hired servants, because that part of the thing that he'd planned to say is missing here. This scene is depicted in a painting by the artist Rembrandt. It's entitled Return of the Prodigal Son. And we can see the father there greeting his son. But notice the father's hands here. Uh, One hand, the father's left hand on the right-hand side of the picture, looks different to the other hand. And some have observed that the left hand there looks more masculine, a male hand, whereas the father's right hand on the left side of the picture looks more feminine, perhaps suggesting that this represents the welcome back by both mother and father. Either that or Rembrandt wasn't very good at drawing hands. But anyway, it's a wonderful picture there depicting this beautiful scene. So the father then gave instructions to his servants to bring quickly the best robe and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand and shoes on his feet, and bring the fatted calf and kill it, and let us eat and make merry. The robe and the ring would be signs of honor and authority. So he's being received back here as a guest of honor, being treated with honor, not being received back as a servant, as he was prepared to do, but welcomed back with this honor. He needed shoes for his feet. Shoes were a luxury item, and no doubt he had walked home barefooted. The fatted calf would have been a calf that was well fed and well looked after, in readiness for a celebration. This was a special occasion, and a special celebration was called for. And there could be no greater occasion than this to kill the fatted calf, to eat and to make merry. And the father explains why such an extravagant celebration is warranted. In verse 24, he says, "For this my son was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found." It's almost as if the father had written his son off, that regarded him as being dead, and now he's alive. He was lost and now he's found. It's as if the son has returned back from the dead. He was dead, he was lost, but now he is alive and he has been found. And so the celebration began. They began to make merry. And we might compare this to the other two parables in the chapter, where when the sheep was found and the coin was found, the neighbors were called in to rejoice. But this celebration is something of on a different level that is called for here in this case. The words and the actions of the Father then show the Son's complete restoration. His status as a son has been restored. He's received forgiveness from his Father. And the point here really is, if a flawed and an unwise human father will react in this way when his son returns home, then how much more would God, our Father in heaven, react when those who are lost return home to him? So there's not an exact parallel here between the Father in the parable and God, our Father. The Father in the parable is human. He has human flaws and weaknesses, but he shows this welcome to his own Son. And if a human Father is willing to do that, then how much greater will our Father in heaven receive us back? So God is like the Father in the sense that he stands waiting for his Son to return and then runs to embrace and to kiss the returning sinner. And this was why Jesus received and ate with the tax collectors and sinners, so that they could learn that God was willing to welcome them. God wanted them to come home, to come to him, and salvation was available to them. And so eating with the tax collectors and sinners was a celebration of their return as well. Well, if this parable ended there, we would think that what a lovely ending to this story. But this isn't the end of the story, because there's someone else involved. And in the parable, Jesus then goes on to talk about the reaction of the elder brother. We haven't seen anything of him since he was introduced right at the start. And this is really the part that is directed to the Pharisees and the scribes, and those who are like them, who in their own self-righteousness would seek to exclude sinners, despite the fact that they may have repented. These are the ones who were offended by what Jesus was doing when he was associating with those people. So whilst the celebration of the younger son's return was going on, the elder son was out in the field where he's been working. And so he's unaware of what has happened. He doesn't know that any of this has gone on in the house. And at the end of the day, when he came near to the house, he was puzzled to hear the sound of music and dancing. So he called to one of the servants to ask what was going on. What did all of this mean? And the servant told him that it was a celebration of his brother's return, and his father had killed the fatted calf because he has received him safe and sound. He's come home in one piece. Well, on hearing this, the elder brother reacted with anger, and he refused to go into the house. He wanted no part in this, what he thought was an inappropriate celebration. And so he's left loitering on the outside. So his father came out then to entreat him, to plead with him to come in and to join in with this celebration. But rather than go in, the elder son angrily expressed his complaints against his father. And so everything that's been boiling up inside of him over the years now comes out in this expression of his resentment. He claims to have served his father for many years without ever disobeying his commands. He sees himself as a loyal and obedient son who has served for many years, slaving away, he says. He sees this, that this has been his burden, his duty to do this. So there is no joy or pleasure that he takes from this relationship that he has with his father and the work that he's doing. And this is his attitude of self-righteousness, that I've been doing all of this. I've been obedient. I've been working hard. And he feels that he is being treated more like a servant or a slave than a son. And despite his loyalty and his obedience, he complains that his father had never given him so much as a young goat, something of much less value than a fatted calf, never been given anything like this to make merry with his own friends. And so he feels mistreated and deprived. He thinks that he deserves to be better treated than this, than the way that he has been. And in comparison with his own treatment, he now looks at how his father has treated his younger brother, who he refers to as this son of yours. So he doesn't say my brother, but this son of yours, so disowning any kind of relationship with him. And he says to his father, when this son of yours came, who has devoured your living with harlots, you killed for him the fatted calf. So he can't understand why his father would do this when his younger son has wasted his money on prostitutes. And here he's making an assumption. There's nothing is said that the son had spent his money on prostitutes. Maybe he did, but we're not told. But he's really emphasizing the worst possible aspects of his brother's behavior, assuming the worst. And so it doesn't seem fair or rational that their father should now treat his younger son so graciously and with such compassion. And he can see no reason to celebrate his brother's return. Leave him to suffer the consequences of his own choices, is what he might suggest. He made his bed, he must lie in it. But his father answers him tenderly. Son, he addresses him, or the word son here is a word that means child. So, and dressing a grown man as child is an indication of the tender affection that the father felt for him. He might be saying something like, my dear boy, you're always with me, and all that is mine is yours. It was fitting to make merry and be glad, for this your brother was dead and is alive. He was lost and is found. The father acknowledges his elder son's constant presence with him. You're always with me, he says. And he reminds him of the privileged position that he is in. All that is mine is yours. You're the firstborn. You have this inheritance. This is yours. So the father loves this son just as much as he loves his younger son. But the elder son saw himself as this slave or servant to his father. He didn't understand that he was really a son with all of the privileges which came with that. And the father had never been unfair to him. All of this was his. His father had always treated him graciously. Neither does he understand that his father's graciousness towards his younger son is not costing him anything. How is this affecting him? So why should he be resentful about the way that their father has welcomed the younger brother? However, the father argues that it was appropriate for them to celebrate in this way and to make merry, because he says, this your brother was dead and is alive. He was lost and is found. So not only was this the right thing to do, it was the necessary thing to do. We had to do this, he says. And the elder son had referred to his younger brother as this your son. But now in reply, the father refers to him as this your brother, reminding his elder son that he still has a brother. He's still your brother, even though you may feel this way about it. And when the dead come to life and when the lost are found, then a celebration is called for. And here Jesus ends the story. But what happened next? We're left to write our own ending. What did the elder brother do? Did he reconcile with his father and his brother? Did he go in and join in that celebration? Or did he remain lost on the outside? And what about the younger brother? What did he do? How did he live for the rest of his life? So Jesus leaves it open here for his hearers to reflect on this and to see where they are in this story. Who are they like? Which brother are we like? Who do they identify with? And what are they going to do now? And how did the scribes and the Pharisees receive this story? What did they think of it? And what did the tax collectors and sinners think about it? And of course, it is something for us to reflect upon ourselves as well. Who are we in the story? Where do we fit in with all of this? What's our attitude? The three parables of this chapter, Luke chapter 15, show our lost condition when we are away from God, and the joy that is experienced when we are found and when we return to God. The first two parables place the emphasis on the one who is searching for that which is lost, the shepherd who's searching for his sheep, and the woman who's searching for her lost coin. In those stories, that which is lost has no ability to find its own way home. But in the third parable, the emphasis is upon the one who is lost, the son, or the sons, if you like. The father doesn't go off to seek the son who's gone away. Rather, the son has to come to his own senses and has to realize the awfulness of the condition that he has got himself into. And it's only when he comes to that realization of what he's left behind that he can then make his way home and make that decision to go back. And then the emphasis comes on the way in which he is received and welcomed by his father and the joy that that brings. So the celebration is a great event that is held when he returns. The parable is really a picture of Jesus' life-giving ministry, that this is what Jesus came to do. This is why he ate with the tax collectors and sinners, to give them that hope, to give them that life. In the parable, the father repeats the words concerning his son twice. He was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. And this is always a cause for great celebration, when all who are dead become alive, when all who are lost are found. So through these parables, Jesus is really justifying himself, justifying his own actions in going out to find to associate with those who are labeled as the tax collectors and sinners, showing them that there is hope, and showing to the likes of the scribes and the Pharisees why he came, why he needs to do this.